All right, good afternoon and welcome to City.AI Orange County, setting the foundation for AI in healthcare. This is our chapter's second online event, and we're really happy to have all of you here with us this afternoon. Since its inception, just a little background on City.AI Global. Since its inception about 3 years ago, the organization has engaged over 26,000 AI industry professionals, as well as 200 ambassadors worldwide. And we have a gentleman who's on with us, who's one of our ambassadors as well. But before we get started, we'd like to thank all of those who are part of City.AI Orange County, who have made this program and so many others happen today. Again, we've got our very own Vernon Colasso, who will be joining this webinar as well. And special thanks to our diamond sponsor, Technossus, who has been instrumental in bringing City.AI to Orange County. Now, folks, we expect this to be a highly informative and engaging discussion with these three incredible thought leaders in artificial intelligence. I'm going to give you a moment to meet them individually. And then what we're going to do is roll this into 3 unique segments and open it up for questions in between. So please, those of you who are just now tuning in, have your questions ready because this group is ready to tackle those. Let's start with you, Stephen.
Oh, thank you very much, Sam. My name's Stephen Borg, and I'm a Director of Medical Imaging in Microsoft Research. So very much looking forward to talking today.
Thank you. Thank you. And Vernon.
Hi, my name is Vernon Colasso. I'm the CEO of IMS. We're a software company. We focus on medical imaging in the cloud. And as part of that, we also do some AI. Looking forward to the talk.
Fantastic. Dr. Bartlett.
Hi, I'm Eric Bartlett. I'm a radiologist at the University of Toronto. I specialize in neuroimaging, and I'm the recent director of the radiology residency training program.
Fantastic. A lot of collective wisdom here, ladies and gentlemen who are tuning in. So we're really excited to get into this topic. Now with that, please, again, have your questions ready. We're going to be breaking this into 3 unique segments with these speakers, and we would like to obviously hear from you in the audience. And we'll also be asking you a few questions along the way. So please keep your eyes open for those polls as well. With that, let's get started. Well, joining us now is Stephen Borg. He is a thought leader, an author, a speaker, a technology guru on all things AI, ML, and so much more. Stephen, thank you so much for joining us. Can you do us a favor? Give us a little bit of a background on you, because I know I did not do your bio any justice just now.
Sam, I think you overdid the justice on the bio. A thought leader and all things AI and ML is a little bit extreme. But my background does come from AI and machine learning. And currently I work in Microsoft as the Director of Medical Imaging in Microsoft Research. And I made that transition over to medical imaging to really bring some of that AI and ML experience to bear in that field.
Fantastic. Well, listen, thank you so much for joining us here at City.AI. And I gotta, you've got an interesting story, Stephen. I mean, there's a strong why as to why you are now at Microsoft doing what you're doing in the healthcare space. Can you give us a little bit of background on that?
Yeah, I sure can. A long time ago, not too long, but a while ago, my dad started seeing a cardiologist in this small town south of Seattle called Centralia. And it's a really small medical institution. And as I was kind of looking around for the thing to do next, I was given this opportunity to go into healthcare and healthcare AI and machine learning. And what I found so compelling in this space is we have this opportunity to democratize AI and machine learning like we never have before. And I can do that and help my dad at the same time. So let me give you just this really small example, if I may. If you're this little hospital that he goes to, he sees a cardiologist there, and the cardiologist is world-class. Dad loves him. He's brilliant. But he's one cardiologist. And if you look at what they can do in AI and machine learning, it's not much, right? They're a small hospital system. They've got basically no data. But if you look at what Mayo Clinic has, or Cleveland Clinic, or any of these really large organizations with massive amounts of data, they can train cardiology models, radiology models. They can train all of these wonderful machine learning models that they can then use in their practices. But the majority of people, in America at least, aren't treated in these massive hospital systems. They're treated in small town, rural America hospitals. So I thought, if I can have an impact, if I can take my passion for AI and machine learning, and if I can bring that to Microsoft, where maybe we can take these models from Cleveland Clinic, from Mayo Clinic, from these other large organizations, from governmental organizations, and we can bring those to use elsewhere, that can democratize a lot. And basically, this small little hospital in Centralia, maybe they can take this beautiful model trained by Cleveland Clinic, say, and bring that down and retrain it on their own data to really tailor it to the way they work and then use it in their own practice. And that's the kind of thing that really gets me up in the morning. If we can make that kind of impact, if we can take what AI and ML is bringing to the space and spread it evenly, not just in America, but around the world, it'll make it all worthwhile. That is an amazing, amazing future we're headed towards.
Oh, it's true. And I'll tell you, you're speaking everybody on this thread's language. I'll tell you, City.AI, the premise is how can we democratize AI and make it truly accessible to so many people in so many industries. So I think you're definitely speaking our language, and I love that story, Stephen. Let's talk a little bit more. Let's dig a little deeper on that, though, because I know the challenge in the healthcare space has been kind of multifaceted. We know that there is a lot of regulation for good reason. You've got, HIPAA issues, you name it. There's a lot of layers to healthcare, and especially when it comes to privacy as well. So kind of adding this new element, what have been some of the challenges that you see us needing to kind of overcome to get people to really kind of open up that database so that we can access some of those additional pieces for reference?
Ooh, that is a really hard problem, because you have places and organizations, and I talk to them weekly, who want to share their data. They want other people to be able to use their data to make an impact, but they don't want to give that data away for a couple of reasons. One, it's illegal, right? You need a secondary use if you're in the States. There's all of these restrictions around it. So you have to be very careful when you're sharing data with another organization. And that's very difficult for a lot of people to do. It's expensive to do so. So that's one problem. And the second is there's a little self-interest as well. If you have this data, it can cause a breakthrough at some point. And even though you may not want to monetize it today, there might be a point in the future where that data can become very valuable, and you want to be able to at least monetize a little bit. You don't want to share it with someone who then trains the model and they become the next, giant company, the next Microsoft or whatever. You want to be able to protect that data. And it's a really difficult problem. And in fact, the example I mentioned earlier with Mayo Clinic and Centralia, right? Mayo Clinic's not going to give their data by any chance to Centralia. And Centralia might also not want to do the same for the reasons we just mentioned. So one of the things that I think is important, and where this industry is going, is something called federated learning. There's a lot of different approaches to this, but federated learning really solves some of those problems. So you could have a researcher from hospital system A referencing data potentially from other hospital systems, and they don't actually have to share their data. Instead, the model is trained in different locations, and they share those training weights basically. So it's a way to distribute the training, not to aggregate the data. So you can have distributed data, and then the model is trained in each of those places, and they basically share their weights. And there's a lot of research still ongoing to make sure that we can't reverse engineer that to get PHI or protected health information out of the models themselves. So you can add a little bit of noise, et cetera. NVIDIA with their Clara system is doing a really interesting piece of work around federated learning. There's other models that we can use as well, but that's one that really has captured my imagination. And I think it'll break down some of those barriers that we're going to find. And then it would allow that small hospital system in Centralia to work with the large giant and potentially train on some of that big data without the necessity of sharing that data.
And you're right. I think there are ways to do that. And I know, listen, you have the resources to probably figure that one out without a doubt, Stephen, but I think you're right. Decentralizing it and making it so that it's difficult, if not impossible, to reverse engineer is going to be step number one and massive. So yeah, I agree with that. One of the things
There's
that
one other area. Let me jump in one more thing, Sam. This is another area, and that's what brought me to this place at Microsoft, which is at the cloud vendors, you have this massive scale. So you can bring in, if people are bringing in their data, it becomes very easy to share that data and train across it as well. So that's an area that I think cloud in general really can stretch what the art of the possible is, because that data can be more co-located and accessed much more quickly than it can if you're sending it over really small pipes, I guess, between hospital systems.
Well, and you're right. And I know, and we will get a chance to talk to one of those companies that's actually doing some really cool stuff, as you know, in the cloud arena on healthcare here soon. But one of the things that you and I talked about before we started rolling here was how we could create better efficiencies, just even if we started with the ER system, right? Triaging patients using AI. Let's talk a little bit more about that, because I think you were onto something pretty cool there.
Sam, I think that again, like you mentioned, it is really cool because in that space, the AI and machine learning space, we often look at these, earth-shattering new models that people are building that are eking out just a little bit better accuracy. But the truth is, there's so much low-hanging fruit, and things like the ER, like. Here come in people that you show up at the ER, you walk in and you're triaged. I have chest pain, boom, you're in somewhere else. My arm hurts a little bit. You might be to the back of the line. But in all of those cases, while they're doing those triaging, while they're getting that little bit of information from you, we could be streamlining things so much. We're already checklist driven inside of ERs. Nurses are given the authority to do things that normally doctors would do in terms of ordering imaging. Why can't we just pass some of that off to a machine learning algorithm? You might have algorithms that are processing people are asking questions, and just behind the scenes, we're scheduling these items for people. Now, we might not schedule everything, right? You only need to cream off just the ones you're most confident about that person with the bone sticking out of their arm, they're going to need an x-ray, right? We can pull off some of those really low-hanging fruit inside of this other ER business, which is also a low-hanging fruit. And if we can just pull through, maybe remove the work of 5 or 10%, even less potentially, we get nonlinear scale. And in other words, it's like a traffic jam. You don't have to get rid of half the cars on the road to unblock a traffic jam. You only need to get rid of 5 to 10%, and things are flowing absolutely smoothly. It's a very nonlinear system in ERs. So when it gets busy and people start stacking up, if we can just reduce the effort a little bit right off the top, we can get nice, clean flow through those ERs. And I think that's just one example of the low-hanging fruit. Another, if I may, can I jump in with another?
Please do it, yes.
The discovery of incidentalomas. I don't know what to call them, but we do all of this imaging. And I was reading in the UK, there's more than 50% of the chest x-rays are never read by a human. I don't know if that's true or not, but it might make sense because you go to the ER, they take an x-ray, and then no one ever reads it because they found out it was something different, right? We don't need to read those, but we still have that x-ray. What if it could be read by a machine learning algorithm that could maybe discover something? Now we don't want to overflow the system with false positives. That's a very real danger. But we are leaving so much on the table. Just the one right now in front of me, because I'm working with a couple organizations that are doing this, is ophthalmologists, right? If you go to the eye doctor and you look in that little thing, right, and they take a quick camera shot of your eye, and then they use that to help determine whether your eye is healthy and those sorts of things. But did you know you can check for prediabetes with that as well? There's 300, give or take, different diseases that show up early in images of your eyes. And yet millions of these images are just sitting around doing nothing. It's cheap. Once an AI algorithm is trained, it's super cheap to run these images through them. These are ways we could start to identify whether someone's going to have a disease later in life. We can pre-treat, we can get it. Pre-treating a disease is so much cheaper. Imagine the impact both on the financial system on the healthcare, but also on people's lives if we can pre-treat early. It's just amazing how much imaging is out there and how much we could do to just extract more use out of that data.
Oh, you're so right. Well, and I tell you, you had actually even, we had talked a little bit about, and we won't mention names, but there was somebody who personally that had an incidentaloma.
Yes.
And let's talk about that story, because I think there's something very impactful about that, and we can thread the needle with this conversation here.
Yeah, well, exactly. This is someone who is very close to me, and is still around today, thankfully. And years ago, 20 years ago, she was experiencing some difficulties and dry tongue and some other things. And in that process of trying to find things out, there was an MRI taken, and that an MRI or CT scan. Not sure which it was actually, CT or MRI. But during that process, in looking at different parts of where they thought the problem was, a doctor just happened to catch on one part of that, the off the beaten path, not where the radiologist was looking, but where the doctor just noticed something that didn't look right, and dove into that didn't look right area and found out that was a tumor, a brain tumor, and went through the process of removing that brain tumor because she would have died, and removed that brain tumor 20 years ago, and she's still with us today. And those are those kind of things that a machine learning algorithm could catch. It could see that because it's looking at the whole image, not just the central point that the radiologist was asked to identify. Mm-hmm. And those types, that's another form of that incidentaloma, if you will, where machine learning algorithm can really pull that out. And it was a doctor in this case, but I'm so thankful for that doctor. Just, you can't imagine how thankful I am for that doctor. And they noticed it. A machine learning algorithm could have picked that up, because if it wasn't that doctor, where would I be today? Where would
right. It would have gone missed. Amazing. Yeah, absolutely. And I think you make the case for better efficiencies, right? And it's not, and I know that the threat that some radiologists and others who are in the space feel when it comes towards AI, because we've talked to some of them about it, is that, I don't want to be replaced. And the reality is, no, this is going to really augment what you're doing and give you the opportunity to really laser focus in on what that ML or AI uncovers, so that you can invest that minute of time that you may have to read a screen and really get to the bottom of what may be the issue. So it's incredible. It's absolutely wonderful. Let's talk a little bit about some of the products that you guys are working on right now.
And so one of the areas that I'm so excited that Microsoft's working on is text analytics for health. And in that, we've taken and we've trained an algorithm that basically parses through text, and you can give it any type of medical-ish text, and it goes through and it identifies different components of that. So it'll identify who the patient is. If they're saying, I've got elbow pain, or I'm experiencing headaches, it'll pull those out as symptoms and identify those as symptoms. If the doctor prescribes a medication, that medication and the amount. So you'll see the amount will be categorized as a dosage, the medication as a medication, and then it's all tagged with the SNOMED code, LOINC code, all these other different types of codes basically are all laid out, so that when you show that text, out comes this, basically it's a structured form identifying all of the things that go into that. One of the things that it's so difficult to do that has messed up a lot of NLP work before, really kind of tripped us all up before, is negations. When a doctor writes down something, or a patient says, I'm not experiencing any headache symptoms, or I'm not experiencing headaches, or my left elbow doesn't hurt, but my right elbow hurts, whatever that might be, the negations are captured brilliantly by this tool. And so I'm looking now at, can we take that tool, and I work on a DICOM service in Azure. Can I take that and, for our customers, parse through those DICOM files, understand this data, and then take that structured data that we've discovered, can we move that into something like FHIR, another standard where we're storing a lot of the clinical data and then link those two together? That gives us that training data, that labeled data that we need to be able to then go back to those people who are so desperately excited about looking at the actual images and being able to do their really important work there. I think that's a huge, maybe not obvious use of AI and machine learning in the medical imaging space. So that's one of the things we're working on at Microsoft, and there's a ton.
Well, you had something, InterEye is another big one, which is open source. We can't ignore that. Let's talk about that.
No, we can't. We can't at all. So InterEye has been around for a while. It's a project at Microsoft run by some brilliant people. And I work with one, Ivan Terapov, and he was one of the original product managers that worked on that. And they've been building this product for quite a while. And it just recently open sourced. And basically what it is, it's a medical imaging training pipeline for AI researchers. So if you have these medical images and you're trying to do research, you can plug them into this InterEye pipeline. And one of the really interesting proof cases that they used was with another organization that they collaborated with, and we've written a white paper that was published at NeurIPS this year. And in it, they used it to identify brain tumors, and then a radiologist will come and they'll mark out around the brain tumor on just one slice, and then it'll propagate those slices through the remainder of the brain tumors. So it'll be able to identify the volumetric characteristics of that brain tumor. And normally this is just hours and hours and hours of effort, because a radiologist needs to go through, not every single slice, but they skip over some slices and then they kind of average in between those slices. Now we don't have to do that. So we get better kind of tumor segmentation and 13 times as fast. So increasing the productivity of radiologists by 13 times. That is an amazing result, right? And of course, this is in a research study. It's in a research environment. Everybody always trips up once we get into operationalizing these things and getting them out to market. But this is a case where I don't see it being complicated to get to market. I don't see it being difficult to improve the radiologist workflow in that case.
And you just hit the nail on the head. You're talking about improving workflow, which is going to enable these folks to do more of what they do best, right? Which is going to have tremendous implications on the entire healthcare model, right? So yay.
Yeah, exactly.
Come on.
I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier, because you've gotten questions from radiologists that say, is my job gone? Is this the end of this career?
Right.
And is AI replacing me? And I hear smart people say things like that, who, AI researchers, and yet I don't think that's the case at all. Tractors didn't remove farmers. We have fewer farmers.
Yes.
But tractors improved their life and made them more productive. It didn't get rid of them. And I look at how we treat radiology in America, and they're slammed with work. And if we can give them tools to help them be more efficient at their job, that's a wonderful, wonderful thing. Well, here, let me give you one example. I'll pick on New Zealand. I was talking to a radiologist from New Zealand, and this is hearsay. I haven't read their laws, but he said that every time there's a read, they need 3 separate radiologists to read it. In America, we generally use 2, but there they have the third radiologist. So they have 3 people check for cancers or heart disease or whatever it is that they're looking for. And they have 3 separate radiologists. Well, that's a lot of radiologists. And the majority of the rest of the world uses 2, a dual read system. So if we could be in New Zealand, take and do the third read potentially with AI, might that be a solution for just a small subset of the cases? The ones where we know really, really well what the problems might be, like a chest x-ray or something like that. And then conversely, in the rest of the world, can we take and add a third read, right? You have 2 radiologists, but we'd add a third read just for that last bit of of safety, that last safety margin check, because, a radiologist might miss something, which is why you have 2 reads.
Right.
And so this gives that one last chance. So there's a small chance a radiologist will miss something, small chance the second one will miss it, but that means there's a tiny chance that both of them will miss it. So if we can get that third pickup, I think it would be fantastic. But that doesn't get rid of the radiologist. AI, I think of it as assistive intelligence, much more than artificial, because it magnifies the ability of a human. And an AI model doesn't know what a brain tumor is. They're trained to recognize patterns, but there are these edge cases, and where humans excel at edge cases,
Mhm.
AI models, at least today, are really thrown off by them. So I know personally, I would love to have an AI read any imaging that I have done. But more than that, I'm going to want a human looking at that as well.
Well, I got to tell you, Stephen, I love how you frame that very end, because I think I'm going to ask this entire crew here what they think about what you just said as it relates to the edge cases and where humans would still excel. I'm curious, Vernon, based on the information that you've gathered on AI, what's your feedback here for Stephen? Because I think his ending was pretty powerful on that last statement.
I think Stephen hit the nail on the head. What we're talking about here is not artificial, but it's assisted. IMS has had a lot of success in terms of applying AI to workflow. We've had several partners who've actually developed solutions from the triaging. And it's interesting you mentioned triaging, Stephen. So we had one partner, they're fairly large, they're cloud-based, and they process on the order of 25,000 x-rays in a day. And so they asked us to work with them to actually develop a solution that would triage the images. And we're talking chest x-rays. And so they would go, high probability there's an issue here, medium high probability there's no issue. And all the images were still being reviewed. It would just change the order in which they were reviewing. So some of what Stephen's talking is actually out there. Companies are developing solutions and using them. In that case, there was no diagnosis being made with the AI. So there was no regulatory, but it's definitely a workflow. And they've estimated just on that savings of looking at the right image by the right people, they're saving about 1 radiologist a year, over time, just because of all the savings.
Which is amazing. And I don't know if you guys noticed, but we had a chance to poll the audience during Stephen's talk. And as you can see, interesting, would you feel comfortable having AI assist a radiologist on making a diagnosis for you or a loved one? And 8 out of 10 responded, said yes. Eric, what do you think? Is that a surprise from your perspective, being in the industry and kind of being on the front lines on that?
Well, I don't think it's a surprise at all. I agree with what Vernon and Stephen are saying. AI, we see it as another tool. And, we're already using AI in very small instances. For example, this is my speech mic when I'm dictating here in my office, and that is a type of AI. It's a tool. It has increased the efficiency of my reports enormously. I don't have to wait 24 hours or 48 hours for somebody to type out my reports. It's there immediately, which means the information is with the patient and the treating physician immediately.
Nice.
I have to say, it's one of those moments when I'm talking a lot about radiologists, and then there's rising panic here because I realize Eric's right there listening in.
He's going to call you on it, Stephen.
Exactly.
Well, we are open to Q&A from the audience. So if anybody has any questions so far, happy to take those from you. But I know we had another poll that we had put out there, and it was interesting. At least we thought it was, do you think deep learning has a place in healthcare? And all the respondents said yes. So, that makes the case for everything that all 3 of you do on a day-to-day basis. Any surprises from that perspective, guys?
I don't think so. I think, as Stephen kind of alluded to, you do have some companies looking for the moonshot, like we're going to diagnose cancer and stuff. I think a lot of companies are also taking another approach, and that's what we're doing. If you start looking at assisting and improving the workflow, there's a lot of tedious things that radiologists have to do. And there's such a great match because radiology is all about pattern recognition. In fact, that's how radiologists are trained. This is healthy, this is unhealthy. And so, so there's a really good match in terms of trying to use AI models and training them in the same way. Stephen alluded to some of the challenges. You know, you have regulatory, you have to get the data annotated, but most of all, you have to get data. We're not talking about, 100 data sets. We're talking about thousands and thousands if you're actually going to train a model that's going to help and be accurate enough, right? That's another thing I think that people don't understand, to get all that data annotated with the actual results, because you need the outgoing results to train the model. So there are challenges, but there's huge benefits, huge benefits.
Definitely. And I know, Eric, your team had the experience of actually doing quite a bit of that with some of the projects that you've been working on. I'm just curious, what was the timeline like on annotating a lot of the data sets that you guys were trying to create for the models that you put together for the students and the residents?
That is the worst part of this whole process. And I have to say that we haven't really done a great job of it. And so we're currently redoing it all to try to figure out the best way in order to build upon what we've already done.
Okay. Yeah, it cannot be easy.
No,
Stephen, any advice?
I'll just say I'll second Eric on this. As an ML researcher will tell you, the first 80% of the effort is spent getting your data clean, and then the second 80% of the effort is doing the model, where they literally have the both 80% and it adds up, because then you run into all sorts of other problems down the road. But joking aside, there is an opacity and a lack of explainability in deep learning models that we're going to have to overcome. We're finding in non-medical cases, we're finding these edge cases or adversarial attacks. I do think we need to worry about those, less so in healthcare. I think where we know what images are going in, and we have that, that kind of chain of custody from the image machine. But I do think it's worth considering, and we do have to figure out a little of that explainability as well.
Any initial thoughts on that? The others who are on the call here, on how we do that?
And as Stephen's alluding to, one of the challenges is getting all the data. If you're going to put something like this together, you need to find those edge cases, because the model has to be trained in those edge cases also. So definitely, again, another one to go on the list of the challenges, in terms of amassing this data. And that's one of the reasons the cloud works so well. If you can basically anonymize the data, put it in the cloud, now you have one data lake, if you want to call it, that you can go harvest all the information that's there. If you have siloed data in a hospital, Stephen mentioned federated training, it becomes much harder to go back and actually train, in these little kind of short segments, as opposed to having the data amassed in one location. So the cloud really has helped in terms of the distribution. You also have the computing power, because it takes a lot of computing power to train and generate these models. You typically wouldn't have that on site. So, so again, the cloud is really kind of provides a lot of the solutions that we're looking at. But as Stephen said, the starting point is the data, getting permission for using it, and then annotated data. And just so it's clear, what we mean by annotated data, it means like actually the results are highlighted in the image. Right? If we're going to train a model to figure out, okay, this is something here, or this is a tumor, we actually have to have those results to train the model. So when we say annotated data, we mean the data or images with the actual results indicated, so that we can now take that and go back and train the model.
It's a lot of work, and it's important work, and glad that we have people like you three, working towards that, shared goal and objective. Any other thoughts before we move into the next segment? All right, well, let's talk a little bit more, and then we're gonna talk to Vernon here more specifically about what IMS is doing and how you are integrating some of your new technologies out there. So please, folks, stay with us and get your questions ready, because we'll see you in about 20 minutes. Joining us now is Vernon Colasso. He is one of our ambassadors here at City.AI Orange County, and he's also founding partner of International Medical Solutions, IMS. Vernon, great to have you here. Thank you so much.
Well, Sam, thank you. And thank you for City.AI inviting IMS to actually participate in your healthcare segment. So we really appreciate the opportunity. So thank you.
Absolutely. Well, you're one of our ambassadors, right? So it makes sense, and you're doing quite a bit in the space. Before we get into some of those details, though, I want to talk a little bit about medical imaging, specifically as it relates to what's been happening in the space, because I know
AI is kind of a down the road thing, but you guys have seen quite a bit of transition as it relates to imaging in the cloud. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so let's talk a little, like you said, medical imaging is arguably one of the most relevant parts of clinical diagnosis in patients. Think of it, the last time you go into a hospital, you might even go for a simple cough or cold, and the doctor will send you for a chest x-ray just to make sure it's not pneumonia. So it's estimated about 70% of all clinical diagnosis and treatment involves some form of medical imaging. It's definitely a relevant piece of modern medicine and how people are being treated and diagnosed. One of the other things that actually is happening in the space is just like our cell phone cameras. Over the last decade, think of your camera, it's gone from 5 megapixels to 12 megapixels. These scanners have actually evolved. And so there is much more accuracy, higher resolution images, which is all great for treatment and diagnosis. But it means larger and larger amounts of data are being actually acquired and have to be stored. So for example, a traditional X-ray image, digital X-ray, would be on the order of about 30 megs.
Wow.
And I mean, there's thousands and thousands of X-rays that are done every year, and those all have to be stored. There's actually a regulatory requirement that requires the hospitals to store these images for 7 years.
So let's stop there for a second, Bernard. So you're talking about 30 megabyte files. And now the hospitals have a requirement to store those just individual images for at least 7 years?
Correct. And so a lot of healthcare organizations struggle with this on-premise storage. They have data centers. Here, hospitals are worrying about IT budgets because they have to buy additional storage for storing this on-prem type of thing. So it's a real struggle for them in terms of how they deal with that. And every year, I was just talking to a partner, and they were saying they just spent several $100,000 on buying more storage because they're storing all this on premises. It's a requirement that they have to actually fulfill.
Wow. Okay. So let's transition into the things that you're doing to solve for this, right? So you have a number of products and programs that you've developed to really address this issue. Let's talk a little bit about IMS Cloudview.
Okay, so IMS Cloudview is a platform that we've developed over the years. It's been in the market for about 4 years, 5 years now, and it's a very mature product. The first thing, I guess, when we looked at the space, one of the things we thought was really missing is a lot of the solutions in the space these days are existing solutions that people have taken and hosted in the cloud. So they're not native cloud, and so you don't get the benefits of cloud computing. You don't get the benefits of the scalability, performance. All those benefits you typically expect from the cloud, and why you would transition to the cloud, are just not there. So when we actually went to come up with the developed a solution, we wanted to make a next generation solution which would try to address some of these things. So both myself and a lot of people at the company all have on the order of 20 or plus experience in medical imaging. So we kind of knew what was missing and what we had to kind of address in the space. And so the big issues tend to be when you're looking at medical imaging in the cloud, performance. People are a little worried. These are very large, as we just said, very large data going to the cloud, coming back to the cloud. I can't have a medical professional sitting there for 20 minutes or 10 seconds or however long to download these images. So that's been a major roadblock to people looking at the cloud. So that's one issue. Another issue, obviously, is security, patient information. This is going over the web, going back and forth. So, how can you actually guarantee that there's a certain level of security for patients' information, their healthcare information, a particular diagnosis for an individual, that type of thing. Third thing has been scalability. Like if I'm looking to scale, how quickly, how easily can I scale on the cloud? Again, all those things are, it's ironic because all those items are typically, that's the reasons you move to the cloud. But because of a lot of the issues, and there hasn't been a lot of good offerings in the market, as I mentioned, because a lot of people have taken their existing solutions and just hosted it on the cloud. So there's been a bit of disappointment in terms of, well, this is just not going to work. It takes too long. We're not comfortable with the security. So these are some of the challenges that are being faced. So when we developed Cloudview, we tried to address all this. And the main selling point for Cloudview is its architecture. So we were able to address a lot of those issues I just mentioned by actually coming up with the architecture, and the basic architecture is distributed computing. move the computing for dealing with the images, for downloading the images, manipulating the images, and allow that to be, some part happens in the cloud, some part happens on the local device that you're actually using to bring these images, to view the images. And that's a key differentiator for us.
So Bernie, yeah, if we could talk a little bit about Cloudview. I mean, obviously native cloud images are important. That's an important piece of this, but you're also talking a little bit about distributed computing. Tell us.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the big difference for us, as I mentioned, is that a lot of the current solutions in the market, they do all the rendering. That's actually bringing up the image, constructing the image. So for example, if the clinician wants to zoom into an image, zoom out of an image, all that is, with the traditional solutions, done on the cloud. And actually only the results are sent to the actual client. So one of the things you would think of, well, if I don't have a very good bandwidth connection, that's going to be pretty choppy. I go to zoom in on the image, it's got to go to the cloud. Our approach is to actually do most of that, if not all of that, on the client. So once we actually get the data to the actual client, whether it be your desktop or your tablet or your smartphone, we're now able to do all the rendering locally. So there's no delays, because it eliminates the bandwidth connection. So one of the comments we get a lot of times is, wow, your application, even though it's cloud-based, runs like an installed application, because everything's happening locally. You don't need to go back and forth between the cloud.
Which is amazing, Vernon. And the fact that you're effectively, device agnostic, if you will, with this need for very little bandwidth makes it a much more efficient process for folks who are in the clinical setting, but also those who are in the university environment as well, which I know you've done quite a bit on both sides. Let's talk a little bit about the clinical packages that you've developed. And because I was just absolutely blown away. I mean, some of these renderings are just beyond, they're cinematic, if you will. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, a lot of people are actually kind of surprised when we mention that we have a solution like this, and that the interaction is so real time and it feels like an installed application. And in order to actually convince people and to demonstrate the capability and the viability of this approach, we, with our partners, have developed several clinical applications. So obviously, the first part is actually viewing the images, being able to do what you need to do when you review the images and you go scroll through them. But now you're actually building a dedicated package. So one package we built was an orthopedic package. And this package is very interesting because what it allows you to do is, most people don't realize, but as a surgeon is planning for a hip replacement, or putting screws in, they need to do a lot of sizing and alignment. So there's a whole planning process that happens before the operation. You don't want to wait till you actually have the patient on the operating table. Oh, I'm trying to size the hip. So a lot of that stuff. So we actually have a solution that's completely 100% cloud-based that allows them to do the planning, sizing in case of a hip replacement or a knee replacement. They're looking at sizing the implant, positioning the implant. So by the time they actually get to the actual procedure, they've already, they know where they're placing the screws, they know where they're actually placing the hip, what size they need to do. In some cases, they also need to make sure if it's just one hip, that the operation is not going to leave one leg longer than the other. So all these things can be planned ahead of time. Traditionally, this kind of package would run on a dedicated specialty workstation on-prem. And so this is kind of amazing for them that they can actually do it over the cloud. Another package that we actually developed is a surgical planning package. And in this package, what people are looking at is they're planning for actually, if they're looking at doing some kind of biopsy, or they're looking at tumor growth. So in this plan, what you're able to do is you're able to actually work both in 2D and 3D, and essentially look at, if you had to remove a tumor, one of the things you want to make sure you're able to do is remove most of the tumor. So it allows you to actually work from the 2D image, but actually view the tumor in a 3D view, real time. And then you're able to kind of, again, plan for how much of the tissue around that tumor you're going to remove. They usually have a safety factor where they remove, like, it's a percentage in terms of how much they'll remove. All this can be planned before the actual procedure.
That's amazing. Let's talk a little bit about the work that you're doing with the University of Toronto. The timing could not have been better. We had a chance to talk to Dr. Bartlett about his vision for University of Toronto residents and also students. IMS came in with a fantastic solution. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, one of the things we identified a little bit early on when we started looking at niche markets for offering our cloud platform was in the education of radiologists today. it's ironic, but they're still using PowerPoints and static images to actually train and evaluate the students, the residents. And so we saw this as low-hanging fruit. As I mentioned, our solution, it's cloud-based, it runs on any device. So as you can imagine, it's kind of cost prohibitive to have the students testing on a real full-blown specialty workstation. First of all, there's only a limited number available in the hospital. There's no time or availability for residents to have access to that. So we kind of thought, wouldn't this be an interesting concept to actually offer this cloud-based training to a university? So we approached University of Toronto, which is the largest residency program in Canada. And we actually came across a couple of visionaries who actually had the same idea. In terms of trying to train and evaluate the capability of a resident, you really need to kind of simulate, if you want to call it, an actual working workstation, have them go through all the images. So typically, if you're looking at a CT, there's 1,000 slices. You need to go through all those slices and actually look for the disease. And typically, that's not something you can do with a PowerPoint static image, right? So we've been working with them for about 18 months. And then with the onset of the pandemic, it really created a more severe need for them. They had some research projects that they were doing, but then all of a sudden, the university was closed, everybody was working remotely, and the urgency of having remote education, so we were able to use the cloud-based solution, and they're handing out assignments, then their quizzes, and they're doing it all through a solution we've developed called IMS Learn, which essentially is using the viewer for having them review cases on whatever device they have. It could be their smartphone, it could be their tablet, at their own convenience, and then submitting the results back to the professor, and she can then evaluate, are they actually learning? Were they actually able to diagnose? Were they actually able to find the right disease here? Did they come up with the right diagnosis? So it's really been a very good thing, both on education side in terms of giving them reference cases, but also in terms of evaluating what level are they at, because these residents eventually will go on call. And the biggest challenge that the educators have is, are they ready to actually do on-call cases? And so they're using IMS Learn in one case for determining is it the right time to transition this resident to actual working cases.
Amazing, amazing. Let's talk a little bit about transitioning to AI. I know we talked earlier about the challenges that the medical community is facing as it relates to moving images from an on-prem environment to in the cloud. Now we're looking at that next step, and I know IMS is actively working on that as well. Tell me a little bit about the AI roadmap for the future in the medical space.
Well, it's interesting because, one of the things most people don't realize is that radiologists, clinicians, the way they're trained, it's all about pattern recognition. So they're trained, this is a healthy anatomy, this is a disease anatomy. And then they go through a process of elimination. What disease is it? What's wrong with the liver? What's wrong with the kidney? So it's a perfect match. I mean, it's a perfect match because AI is all about pattern recognition. So there's a great match. And, I mentioned a little earlier about there's been a little bit of a pause. There's been a little bit of a hesitation of moving to the cloud on the part of the healthcare organizations, but the potential of AI to improve patient outcomes is really being a driving factor to move them to the cloud. And so some of the challenge, so the potential for AI in healthcare is huge, but it's not without its challenges. So, for example, one of the things that needs to be done, as we just mentioned, a lot of the data on-prem it's siloed. It's sitting over here on one archive or another archive. In order to do AI, you need to actually have a large repository of data all put together, and then you need to harvest it for AI. So, for example, we finished a project with one of our partners, and we needed on the order of 100,000 X-ray images.
Wow.
100,000 X-ray images. Now, you don't typically come across, and that's one piece, but we needed it all to be normalized, all to be in one place. If you actually have that stored in the cloud, you already have that by default. You don't need to go looking and collecting it. Another aspect of another challenge that is you need data to be annotated. What I mean by that is there needs to be a result. So if you're looking at trying to diagnose, a tumor, or you're trying to diagnose a certain disease, there needs to be an actual result that you can use to train the AI, right? So it needs to be annotated, like this is the disease part, this is the disease tumor, this is the disease anatomy that you need to look at, or this is a biomarker. They call them this is an indication of this disease. So we need that kind of data So it has to have an outcome that we can take and now plug into the training of the AI model. So getting that kind of data is also difficult. But again, if you have it in one repository, that's a great place. That's a great way to kind of be able to leverage that and harvest that data for AI.
And we're not looking, Vernon, from a medical perspective at replacing a radiologist with AI by any stretch. You're really talking about creating more efficiencies here, correct?
Correct. So another challenge is that there's a lot of hesitation on the part of healthcare professionals. Am I kind of working with something here that eventually is going to replace me? Or, so there's a lot of suspicion in terms of what am I doing here? So one of the things, and you've seen a lot of large companies that have actually tried to go for the moonshot. We're going to diagnose cancer. We're going to diagnose this. Those are all great, not without their challenges. There's regulatory challenges, there's adoption challenges. So one of the things we've focused on, and we've had a good amount of success, we're a smaller company, so we can't wait to okay, well, it's going to go through X number of years of regulatory approval, to say this AI is working. So we have actually taken the approach of looking at using AI to improve workflow, productivity enhancements. The benefit is there. Nobody's going to say no to it. This is not doing my job. It's helping me do my job quicker. So there's the convenience and the productivity. So, for example, one project we did with a partner, they were processing on the order of about 25,000 X-rays a day. They're a large radiology service. They're totally cloud-based. They get all these images from all their different sites, and they need to process it. They have X number of radiologists that are sitting remotely diagnosing. And so what they want to do is something relatively simple. They wanted to kind of triage these X-ray images coming in. So these ones have a high probability there's a problem. These ones have a high probability that they're normal. These ones have a lower probability. So, and then take those and actually make sure they kind of categorize them, but then hand them off. So obviously the high probability would be dealt with first. The lower probabilities would be dealt with by maybe more junior people. Everything still got reviewed. Everything still got reviewed by licensed radiologists, but it was just a more efficient way of going through the images. Something as small as that. And our partner actually said at the end of the day, when we helped commercialize that with them, that was saving on the order of one full radiologist at the end of the year. In terms of, and think of it, that's
time, correct? I mean, really.
Exactly. Huge time savings, huge productivity enhancement for them. And
Which
so
means
that approach of looking at these productivity enhancements has been really something, and we could commercialize it fairly quickly. No regulatories involved. The adoption is great because it helps people do things quicker. So another example, we had another customer that had a very complicated measurement that needed to do, but it was very repetitive. And so we helped automate that with some AI. We automated the measurement. So essentially now, instead of them going and starting from scratch when the images come in, they basically now just review the measure, make sure they're happy with it. And so it goes from half an hour of work to like 2 minutes of, yes, this looks good. And again, another thing was fairly easy. Adoption was good, easy to commercialize. So that approach to AI in medical imaging has been something that's worked well for us.
Now, we should add, for those who are just now tuning in, that your platform is FDA approved.
This is an FDA approved viewing solution that allows you for diagnosis. Earlier this year, we also got our mobile 3D FDA approved, so that a lot of people's first question is, okay, you can do 2D, can you handle 3D over the cloud with really good interaction? We got our regulatory approval from the FDA, so 2D, 3D review. These are the full fidelity images, so there's no issue using it for diagnosis.
Well, we've got about a minute or so left, but I do want to touch on one of the things that you're also working on. You're working on electronic health records that ingest medical imaging, which is unbelievable. Tell us a little bit about that program.
So, over the last couple of years, there were a lot of incentives for hospitals to move to electronic medical record. The whole reason was, okay, let's eliminate the paper. Let's actually make things more efficient. One of the challenges they've had, so they've been able to get a lot of the data in lab reports, different types of information about the patient. But one of the things they've struggled with is they haven't been able to bring in the medical images into that EMR. So we've been working with a couple of partners to actually consolidate that. And one step further, if you're actually talking about cloud-based stuff, it even goes one step further, because now we can pull everything in from the cloud. And so we now are basically being able to introduce our Cloudview solution platform into the EMR. So now you can see side by side, you can actually pull up, if I need to see an X-ray image, I need to see an endoscopy, I need to see a CT image, all side by side. So one practical example of this is the tumor board. And I don't know, everyone typically has somebody in their family who's gone through cancer. So if you know how that's typically managed, you have this concept of a tumor board, which is an oncologist who manages the cancer, a surgeon, your interventional radiologist. This is a collection of healthcare professionals that try to manage the case. And one of the challenges they have is, how do they all look at this information? The surgeon obviously is interested in the 3D. The oncologist is looking at, we did a biopsy. The pathologist might be looking at the actual slide images. So Cloudview allows you to act as a universal viewer and bring all these images in side by side. The other benefit is, as you can imagine, all these different professionals, how do you even get them all in the same room? How do you schedule? Now, since everything is cloud-based, it can be all done remotely. People can call in on a Zoom call. They can actually all see the same images. So it's getting a lot of traction for us in the marketplace.
And it's so much better, Vernon, to your point, for patients, for caregivers. I mean, personal experience. We had a situation, and, again, back in the day, we'd have to get all the actual DVDs, the CDs, the slides.
Correct.
We put 3-ring binders together for everybody
Correct.
on that tumor board. And wow, that was unbelievable. So the fact that you're cutting through all of that, creating this platform and making it accessible to everybody who's on somebody's case is really remarkable.
Well, it's huge.
Before...
it's huge because the paradigm has changed. Instead of, as you mentioned in the past, you bring the image to the specialty workstation. Today, with the cloud-based solution, you basically bring the image to wherever you are on whatever device you want. Complete paradigm change. Huge disruption into the thing, but great opportunity to improve patient outcomes.
Incredible, incredible. One last thing, I want to just give you a little shout out here. IMS is one of the top participants in the Radiology Society of North America competition. Really quick, Vernon, you guys are top, I think 5% in the world on some of these.
Well, actually 3%. It was 3%.
Oh, there you go. Even better.
No, thank you for recognizing that. It's something, so just really quickly, one of the things we do to try to distinguish ourselves in terms of developing AI models, like every software company is offering AI now. So we enter into these competitions. This particular competition, the RSNA1, is the biggest one in medical imaging. In this case, there was about 784 teams from all over the world, universities, individuals, companies, and you all start off with the same data, which on the order was about, I think, 19,000 cases. This particular competition was to diagnose a pulmonary embolism, which essentially is a blood clot that develops, maybe in your calf and goes into your lungs. Thousands of people die from this every year, and it's preventable, it's detectable, but it's very tedious to actually go through all the images looking for it. So it's a really practical application of AI. And so everyone starts off with the same model. At the end, the judges evaluate based on readiness, effectiveness, how accurate. And so we finished in the top 3%. So thank you for recognizing that. It was a lot of good work on our part. So and it levels the playing field because everyone starts with the same data, the same stuff. It's really, what are you doing different to make your model different from the other groups that are doing it? So.
All right, Vernon, I apologize for missing those other 2% because I can appreciate the energy and the effort that you guys put into making that really go. I'm curious to kind of dig a little deeper on that distributive computing piece, because I know, everybody on this, thread here has an opinion on how best to execute on that, but that makes you guys particularly unique. Stephen, are you doing much in that, given where you guys are right now?
Not on the distributed side. I do a lot of my work right in the cloud. I'm super happy if everyone runs all their compute and renders all their images on the cloud. It may come slow, but they'll pay us a bunch of money, right? No. To be fair, this idea of distributed compute is where companies like IMS and Microsoft can work very collaboratively, because we can take that storage backend and then distribute the compute down where it really belongs, which is with the customer and with the radiologist, right? You don't want to wait for zooming or rotating or those things for the latency to go up to the cloud and back. So it's that handshake or collaboration that I find really effective from a standpoint of distributing compute widely. From Microsoft, I jest everything should run in Azure, but in fact, there's a real strong reason to make those things run in both places.
Well, I think one of the things to add to that, Stephen, is that most people, I guess they underestimate. I mean, if you look at the computing power of your phone, your tablet, these things have huge computing power. And so, the fact that we can take advantage of the fact that you can actually do, as you showed, Sam, that cinematic rendering on, 3D high-end detailed rendering, looks almost like a picture, like a movie on your phone, on your iPhone, is just huge. But that speaks to the computing power that's capable in these devices today. And so how we're able to actually achieve that is that, we're zero client, so nothing's ever installed or stored on the device, but we use the computing power once the images are actually downloaded from the cloud, and we have a proprietary way of doing that. We actually use the computing power on the device itself to do all the rendering. So there's no delays. So even if you have a low bandwidth connection, you're not seeing any choppiness. Everything is rendered locally right on the device. And so it feels like an installed application because to some degree it is, like it's running the local, using the local storage, it's using the local computing power to actually render that image.
And I'll tell you guys, we did test that out before this. I mean, so we were curious because, it's one thing to hear somebody say it. And I love your passion and your vision, Vernon, but we wanted to know. And so
Right.
we said, wow. And we were actually manipulating those images on our iPhones and it was pretty awesome. Yeah, or I should say my Android, I tested on my Android as well.
Yeah,
Just to be fair, Stephen, okay?
Good.
So it worked on both. But
well, and I think Eric also had a unique perspective because when we first approached them, like he had a problem he was looking to solve. Eric, you want to comment?
Well, in some of our educational work, we were trying to get, volumes of images, and we had a latency problem. And so if you're trying to simulate real life, it just wasn't working. And, if we just go back to what we do every day, reading images, each study has hundreds, if not thousands of images. And on every image that I look at, I'm making probably 100 decisions, all very subconsciously, but very quickly as I look from image to image. And so if I'm needing to verify something, I need to look at a different plane, or I need to do some sort of 3D rendering. I need that to be pretty quick because, I've got hundreds more decisions to make.
Now, another question I want to put out to you guys. So we did ask the audience a poll. Do you feel the FDA is regulating the use of healthcare AI sufficiently at this time? And kind of surprised. It was mostly yes. We had a couple of no's. What do you guys make of that?
Oh,
Yeah.
that's a really hard question.
Yeah.
I heard someone else jump in. I'm going to pass it off to whoever else is willing to answer that.
Well, from our point as a potential supplier of these AI models, I think one of the challenges is that there are a lot of claims that are being made. So, for example, the X-ray triaging, that's not something unique that I mentioned before. That's not something unique to IMS. Stanford has a solution. There are several universities that have solutions, and everyone claims that their solution is the best. These are all different AI models, but I think one thing that the market struggles with, how do I actually compare? Like, how do I say, okay, so Stanford makes some claims. IMS says they've done something to commercialize for the part. So how do I actually compare that? How do I, what's the, right now within a lot of aspects of the FDA in our field, there's a lot of things that are regulated. So when you say something's FDA approved, there's a certain standard that you're able to say. And so a potential user knows that comes across with, okay, it's been reviewed, the FDA says it's okay and it's accurate. But in the case of AI, I think things have moved so quickly on them. And also in the case of all the devices you can use. So they have recently put out several different new guidelines, but it's such a moving target for them. And the other thing I think that as a supplier, I think they need to do is distinguish between productivity in AI use and actual diagnosis. Right. And I think that's another thing they're struggling with. Where do they draw the line in terms of what actually comes off as, okay, this is a productivity, so there's still someone reviewing it. This is kind of a standalone diagnosis type thing. And that's something I think they're working on. And it's definitely something they need to address going forward, And it's also guidelines for the suppliers. Where do you, like, which type of AI you're actually developing, and what's the rigor that you need to put it through before you can actually offer it as a solution to the market.
And I think you and Stephen kind of said it pretty strongly in both of your talks just now about the efficiencies and the opportunity to really kind of streamline processes. And that's kind of the low-hanging fruit on all this, it seems like right now.
Yeah, I mean, for example, we talked about that RSNA competition. That was, I mean, on the order of 2 million CT images. It was about 10,000 cases that were all annotated. And that's rare that you get, it's hard to get all that data. Now, they had organized it with a lot of their partners, RSNA being the Radiology Society of North America. But yeah, it just goes to show you the effort you need to put in. But if you look at the numbers, there's about 500,000 cases a year of pulmonary embolism. And it's very tedious to go through all those images, sometimes 1,000 slice CT looking for that biomarker, that indication that there could be a blood clot. The fact now that you can have an AI to run through it and at least, not diagnose it, but at least indicate, go back to slice 400 and look at that, go back to this slice, look at it, and still have the diagnosis done by the radio. It's a really good marrying between, it's a time saver, it's highlighting the actual critical things, as opposed to, as Eric was saying, I spend how much time going through all those slices trying to find the problematic one. And even then, do I know I covered everything? Did I miss something? Like Stephen was alluding to, like, what they do in New Zealand, having 3 different radiologists to look at this. That's a lot of time. That's a lot of commitment, right? So if somehow you can have, it's almost like a second opinion, a second check type of thing in terms of going through the stuff. And so you had this independently validated, solution that's going back and highlighting things. The other thing that I think is a big discriminator for AI, it's not as subjective. Different people, obviously, based on your experience, based on where you were trained, based on what you're looking for, based on the time of day. This is the last case I'm reviewing before I go home. Everybody knows, right? It's the last one I'm doing before I head home. I'm kind of rushing. You eliminate a lot of that subjectiveness, and that's where I think the benefit is in terms of using AI to kind of help streamline and make it more productive. So yeah, but again, it's not without its challenges. There's huge potential, but there's also some large challenges and hurdles to overcome.
Any other thoughts before we take a look at what University of Toronto is doing? Okay, guys. Yeah. So we will see you in about 10 to 15 minutes. We're going to take a look at what's going on in Eric's neck of the woods here. Joining us now is Dr. Eric Bartlett. He is a neuroradiologist and assistant professor at University of Toronto. Doctor, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And kudos to you. Throughout this entire COVID situation and throughout this whole year, University of Toronto has not missed a beat thanks to your vision. Doctor, let's talk a little bit about that vision and the foundational curriculum at University of Toronto, which, folks, by the way, U of T is #1 in Canada and one of the top programs in the entire world, thanks to the efforts of this gentleman here.
Oh, well, thank you. We were lucky in our program to partner with IMS over a year ago. And through that partnership, we actually moved our curriculum online, as you said, into the cloud. And that was fortuitous, as at the end of March, with COVID, we all went online into our virtual environments. In our typical curriculum, that would have actually kept our new radiology residents from learning all the things they need to learn before they enter the clinical world. Luckily, with our partnership with IMS, we had been working on digitizing all of our foundations curriculum and moving it to the cloud. So by the time we needed that curriculum, it was ready for us, and our residents were able to interact with the lecture material and all of the imaging cases on the cloud at home, being safe from COVID.
Which is amazing. And for those who are not familiar with traditional radiology training programs, they're typically 2D programs that rely heavily on PowerPoints, textbooks, slides. And what you've done here is you've taken that and created this 3D immersive experience that students can access using any device remotely, anywhere that has an internet connection, which is truly remarkable. Tell us a little bit more about that.
So we're a 5-year training program. The first year in training is in clinical services, as residents transition from being medical students into learning how to interact as physicians within the larger healthcare environment. At the end of the first year, the residents in our program move from doing clinical services such as internal medicine or surgery onto the radiology service. And this is when they start learning all about radiology. Radiology is medical imaging. It encompasses everything from ultrasound to plain film or X-ray, nuclear medicine, CT examinations, and MR examinations. And the role of the radiologist is to take the clinical information they have, look at the images that are produced by our technologists, and come up with a diagnosis or a series of potential diagnoses. And as you can imagine, this is a very hands-on process. And by looking at a single image in a textbook or a few images on PowerPoint, you don't get the full spectrum of the imaging or the imaging experience. Everything in imaging needs to be taken in context, not only with the clinical information that's provided by our clinician colleagues, but by the entire study. What you might see in the chest might change, your opinion might change by what you see in the abdomen, and et cetera. So you need to see the full spectrum, the full study. And so CT and MRI are what we call cross-sectional studies. And so we basically image from the top down, like slices of bread, and we take all that information and put it all together in order to make a diagnosis. So with the help of IMS and IMS Learn, we were able to take our foundations curriculum. We were able to put full DICOM image sets, which means we could look at all of the data within the imaging all at once and not just one or two images to try to make a diagnosis. So the residents had an immersive experience in radiology as they were beginning, even though they happened to be learning this from home.
Truly amazing, doctor. And I'll tell you, I've had an opportunity to look over the shoulders of medical practitioners way back in the day. And as you know, typical images are done on film, they're backlit, they're very much a two-dimensional experience. And what you've done is you've created this opportunity for people now through the help of IMS to look at these images in 3D and actually for radiologists to now look behind organs. It's truly remarkable. And to have this integrated into a teaching and training environment is amazing. Now, was this your vision from the very beginning?
Well, like many visions, your vision grows as you realize some of the possibilities and you find applications. And we certainly knew that we needed to develop a full case file. And when I'm talking about case file, a case file is with what we call DICOM images. This is the type of image that we get when we make medical images. And this is, will be the full set of data that is behind every imaging study, whether it's ultrasound or even plain film or CT or MRI types of images. So certainly, the image grew as we realized how important, moving education onto the cloud was going to be. And of course, creating a database of cases is critically important so that residents have a place to turn to learn about imaging in general and the different pathologies they need to be familiar with in order to gain competence.
Building on that, I know you put together this very comprehensive database, and I know you also put together an extensive X-ray module. Tell us a little bit more about that and what's involved there.
So the chest X-ray module was developed with help of IMS Learn, and the purpose behind the project was to give our residents and our medical students who wanted to learn about radiology and potentially become a resident in radiology, we want to give them more experience in plain film reading and specifically chest X-rays, which is one of the most basic, however, some of the most complex imaging studies out there. Unfortunately, at many of our centers, we're very focused on cross-sectional imaging. So that's CT and MR, two different ways to image. And a lot of the plain film examinations aren't available for teaching purposes. And so I had a concern that the residents were not seeing enough plain film. And we also wanted to provide a learning experience for medical students who were rotating through courses in radiology in medical school.
Now, I understand there's never really been a baseline curriculum for teaching other healthcare practitioners how to read medical images. Is this another part of your vision?
Oh, absolutely. I think this is the vision for a few generations down the road. Obviously, a robust database needs to be created that is properly searchable. And the best way to do that, I think, is in the context of our radiology residency program and our other training programs in radiology. But once that's established and we know how to work with this data, then absolutely, this sort of data is important not only for radiologists, but for the entire the entire medical community. Everyone in medicine works with imaging one time or another. Some people work with it all day long, not to the extent of a radiologist, of course, but everybody needs to have some familiarity with medical imaging. Because a radiologist may not be available immediately, and some basic skills need to be present in all physicians. And of course, with a project that has a scope of teaching about medical imaging to the entire healthcare enterprise, that's ultimately our goal, and I think would be quite valuable.
Absolutely. And this leads me to my third question, which has to do with the piece of your vision involving the ER simulation. Now, we know that there was never really a great way to assess the readiness of a resident to determine if they were truly ready to take on a shift in a hospital environment. Tell us a little bit more about what that process used to look like and what challenges the ER sim has solved.
So I can speak from the context of our program and from my own context of training as a radiologist many years ago. So ultimately, when you start radiology, you start on rotations, and they'll be based upon systems or body parts. And so neuroradiology, imaging of the brain and spine and face. You might go to musculoskeletal imaging, chest imaging, etc. So when you're learning about radiology, you rotate through these various subspecialty areas in radiology, and you need to learn about what you do and how to make diagnoses in these subspecialty areas. Usually with that, you start to take on more responsibilities as you gain some knowledge, and you'll start taking after hours experiences like being on call. And so this is when you're the first person to take a look at a case, you'll make a preliminary report and you'll send that in, and the preliminary report will be evaluated by the staff radiologist at a later time, usually later in the evening or in the morning. So there's a delay in getting a final diagnosis. But this gives the radiology resident real world experience. So as you can imagine, the training of the very young radiologist is critically important, because in that lag period between a resident putting a preliminary diagnosis and then a final read from the radiologist may be a number of hours. And sometimes a physician needs to act on the preliminary report at the time it's placed and can't wait for that final diagnosis. Now, our residents are very, very good, but that doesn't mean that they know everything, because they're just learning radiology. So it's critically important for us to do this training appropriately and properly. So this was the whole purpose behind developing the emergency radiology simulator, which we started about 5 years ago. And we're currently in our 4th generation of the ER sim, and added a full DICOM viewer so that residents have a more high fidelity experience in the simulation of looking at the full data imaging sets. And that was, of course, through the partnership with IMS. The advantage as a training director to having this tool is that I can detect when a resident needs more support during the time of their training before we actually put them on a shift where they are at the hospital in the evening making some preliminary diagnoses. And so we started the ER sim again 5 years ago. We've gone to a really relatively high fidelity simulation experience now. 3 years ago, we rolled out the experience across 10 universities in Canada and 2 universities in the United States. And with that data, we've been able to help program directors and residents with making that critical decision about when a resident is able to take on more responsibilities, and be in the hospital overnight to make preliminary diagnoses.
That is a big deal. And we know the challenges that are being placed on anybody in the hospital setting are truly monumental today. To be able to test somebody again and determine if they are ready to participate in this live hospital setting and have that baseline understanding is truly remarkable. Looking past this ER sim, the foundational curriculum, the chest x-ray module, what's next for you?
Well, I think the emergency radiology simulator and the X-ray module and the foundations curriculum that we created are samples of what you can do with the data. Ultimately, we need to continue to work on our database. We need to have enough cases in all subspecialty areas so that we can truly start to represent at least the basics of what a radiology resident needs to know after their 5 years in training. Once you have that, then the database can be used for a number of different purposes, not only by the learner, but by the educator. From the learner's perspective, a database like this that can be searchable is helpful in not only your daily studying, taking a look at a number of different cases with the same diagnosis to look at the different variabilities between what a certain type of pathology may look like. Look for complications that may be associated with a certain diagnosis. You can't get these sorts of things by looking at just a fixed set of images in a textbook or even on a PowerPoint presentation. And it's hard to get a full range of experience like this by just showing up to work every single day because the pathology that you may need to know may not be coming in on the daily work list. And so having a database like this is critical for that type of studying. It's also critical for diagnostic support. So if you happen to be thinking that what you're currently looking at clinically may have a certain diagnosis, but you're not sure because it doesn't look like what you might see in the textbooks, you could go to this database, you could search the database and look for cases that are similar to the diagnosis or the same diagnosis that you think is occurring in your clinical case. You add AI to that, and you may be able to even figure out or have demonstrated what other people who are searching for the same sort of pathology might also be looking at, which might expand your potential differential diagnoses that you want to make for your patient that you're currently treating. So that's just kind of the start, I think, from the learner perspective. From the educator perspective, a database like this will help you not only sustain some of the assets that you're creating, like, for example, our X-ray module and our emergency radiology simulator, but it would help us more easily update high fidelity simulations like the emergency radiology simulator. And the emergency radiology simulator was a very specific simulator for a very specific purpose, and it's a very important purpose. But there are other very similar types of needs in education throughout training. Our next step is to look at making a breast imaging simulator. We have a number of program directors across Canada who are interested in creating a simulator that is just as high fidelity as the emergency radiology simulator, that deals with all the different modalities and the decision-making that needs to go into breast imaging.
Thank you so much for this and for all of your work.
I gotta tell you, you are probably one of the most humble, down-to-earth doctors that I've ever had an opportunity to meet. You are just so relaxed, and I'm gonna give you a chance to brag a little bit, and if you don't, I'm gonna put Vernon on the spot and make him do some bragging for you, Eric, because you are taking on a more expansive leadership role as it relates to radiology education. Let's talk a little bit more about your what's next, because I know there's a big vision you have here.
Well, I'd like to continue to work on everything that I mentioned in that video. It's a big job trying to create a database of properly annotated and annotated data sets, our DICOM sets, imaging sets. So, that is the big step. Once that's done, then I really think that a number of the solutions that we've been searching for in the education space, as well as the diagnostic space, can really naturally come from that, especially with, partnering with IMS or, Microsoft. The sky's the limit. So, what I'd like to do is continue that work, not only for our residents, but I'm looking for enterprise solutions for the hospital group that I work with, and then expand it beyond our borders across other programs in Canada and the United States would be great.
Do you have a resource wish list right now, Eric?
Well, the wish list keeps growing, and so I need to upload that to the cloud, I think.
Sam,
We may need to.
As you mentioned, Eric is very humble. Just as you know, he is actually in the background trying to work on expanding this to several hospital groups in the Toronto area, and then maybe eventually even taking it nationwide in Canada. One of the things that it's clear, and a lot of people talk about the pandemic and what's going to stick after the pandemic. So this whole, in education, I know my kids, they're doing virtual right now with the school on a part-time basis, and part-time they're in, but that's probably gonna, some of that's gonna stick. And so having these tools, it's definitely going to be a great enhancement, because, and to mention, we're talking about education of residents here, but there's also a certain level of education that happens at this, what's called CME, continued medical education. So radiologists and other medical professionals are actually required to take courses on an ongoing basis for X number of credits to keep their licenses current. And so that's typically called CME. And one of the challenges they have is, so a doctor typically will go to, or a radiologist will go to an actual meeting. It's 3-4 days. They have to be off this thing. They have to travel, hotel. So one of Eric's visions is to actually use this same platform for CME. So the actual professional, these are actually working professionals, don't have to travel for these courses. They can do it all at their own pace, on their tablet, on their phone type of thing, and meet the requirements and gain their credits. And, and also the solution will allow you to evaluate how well have they digested all this additional information. So that would be a huge saving for these medical professionals, not having to travel, take the time off from work, type of thing, and have this being done more at their convenience, rather than 3-4 days blocked off. I can't do anything. I've got to sit in front of these seminars and ramp up on, to keep my license current.
Really good.
I have to just jump in, because I want to just say that your collaboration here has been nothing less than astounding. Eric, you said something that you said lots of things that blew my mind, but one of them, you said, like many visions, the vision grows. And I keep thinking in my past, and every time the vision has met reality, there's been an awful lot of expectation setting. So hearing this expansive growth and the things you're doing in the future, something's going really right, and you've done an amazing job. I just had to throw that in there.
Oh, appreciate it. Thank you so much.
So I know we asked Eric for his resource wish list. Stephen, Vernon, do you have one in case anybody happens to be listening in and they're ready to roll up their sleeves?
I always have wish lists, not only just from an employment standpoint, like bringing in good people into Microsoft research, but also this sharing and this collaboration that occurs out in the AI and ML community in the imaging space is wonderful. So if I have any ask of any resourcing, it's just to continue this sharing that people do in that space with one another, because we learn most when we're standing on the shoulders of giants, and there's a lot of really, really smart people spread throughout industry. So I would say that collaboration is huge, and it's the best thing we can do to advance the interests of everyone.
I'll tell you, we're all very lucky and very fortunate to have all three of you here today contributing your wisdom. Thank you. Thank you so much. It means a lot to us and to City.AI and those who were able to join us today and those who may be joining us later. So really appreciate all the great work that you're doing and contributing to the success of those who are listening. So thank you again, and we look forward to connecting with you again soon.
Well, thank you for having us, Sam, and having a healthcare segment. And hopefully somewhere in the future, we'll have a second one where we can give you some updates on some of the progress that we're making.
Would love that.
Okay,
Would
well, we'll look forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you again, guys.